everyone. How's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. And another week against the Steelers and another creative way that the Bengals find to lose the game. Very exciting game. Very heartbreaking game. Kind of also a dreary game for those who were in actual attendance for the contest. But nonetheless, the Bengals once again fall to the Steelers in heartbreaking fashion, 28-21, and we're here to talk all about that. We're going to talk about the Chiefs game on Sunday Night Football, but we're also going to make this episode of the Orange and Black Insider, we're going to make it very listener heavy. But what I mean is we're going to take a lot of texts. We're going to try and take quite a few calls. We're going to try and take comments, tweets, all that kind of stuff. We've already got some stuff teed up on that front. So during the middle of the show this time, we're going to take a lot of your questions, a lot of your tweets, texts, live comments in the YouTube chat. So hit us up. We'll give you the live number to hit up in just a little bit. But I want to bring in my co-host, John Sheeran. John, you're still repping a little bit with the Bengals shirt there. How you doing after this one? This was a heartbreaker.
I'm just in the middle of failing midterms in school, just like the Bengals are failing midterms in the NFL season.
I like the correlation there. Very well done. Yes, and I do appreciate your dedication because for those who do not know, John usually records in the comfort of his own home. But the Wi-Fi is having issues there. So he has gone to the University of Cincinnati library, the digs there. You can tell there's a lot of artwork and good stuff going on in the background.
Yeah, for sure. And the lighting here gives me like Pete Davidson eyes. So I apologize for the YouTube viewers.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you joining us. I know our listeners are stoked to have you with us once again. We may be joined by a special guest in just a little bit, but we will see. Let's start off with this Steelers game, John. Another way the Bengals just, but even though they lost, this one had kind of a different feeling to it because they played relatively well on offense. They hung in there, and they did what they've done for most of the season, which is come back late, have a nice drive towards the end of the game, and with less than a minute and a half, they score the go-ahead touchdown. You think, yeah, you're a little worried about the time on the clock, but you're kind of saying, hey, they've done this before now this year. They've won games in this way. Finally, they're slaying the dragon, and then it erupts on them. Your overall thoughts before we dive into some more distinct things into the game.
Yeah, like before the game, it just kind of felt like this game will tell us a lot about how good this team is, I guess, because being 4-1, 5 weeks into the year, dealing with some major injuries already, it's something to shrug off. Obviously, the team is talented. The new coaches who have come in seem to have made an impact, but the core guys that have kind of really solidified the identity of this team are still here, and all of those guys have been a part of just minimal success against the Pittsburgh Steelers, specifically in Paul Brown Stadium. Like in the Andy Dalton era, there's only been one win at home, against the Steelers. So I get it that like it wasn't like an awful loss. They didn't get blown out. They obviously lost in the last seconds, but the NFL doesn't keep tally of close losses or good losses. They just keep tallies of losses. And like at some point they have to find a way to beat them because it's such a pivotal game, not only for the reputation of the team, but also for like the divisional race in itself. Like any division loss is not going to be optimal, especially when it's a team like Pittsburgh who competes year in and year out. And there was just a lot of things in the game that people have pointed to as like the reason why like they lost. They pointed to some missed calls or a bad call and then a missed call on the final Steelers offensive drive. And obviously there was the platitude of injuries on the defensive side of the ball that obviously had some impact to it. But when you really boil it down to it, and I guess we'll go over this in a second, the Bengals just beat themselves, kind of like they always do against the Steelers. They just can't. There's just a mental hurdle that they just can't seem to jump high enough. And And like you said, it was just Sunday was just another way of telling us that they haven't eclipsed that hurdle. Like whether it's dumb penalties at the end of the game or just failing to execute or put your best players in the position to succeed. And that's kind of what we saw on Sunday. And until those things kind of get better, it's just what we can expect with Marvin Lewis still coaching here when the Steelers come to town.
Unfortunate truth being spoken by my co-host there on a lot of different respects. I do want to say, and again, yeah, like you said, there's not a column in the standings for moral victories, for almost wins, or anything like that. I do want to say that this was a much more enjoyable game
for sure
than many to watch from a Bengals standpoint than many others that we've seen, primarily because of the quarterback play. I have to say Andy Dalton, in not great weather, with not great protection, missing a lot of weapons, turnoverless ball game, had the go-ahead touchdown pass at the end of the game, led another masterful 2-minute drive. I was very impressed with how he played. Yes, there were some dry spells that happened primarily in the third quarter, but I really thought that Andy Dalton played very well. Your thoughts quickly on him before we segue into something else you were talking about.
And the leader into week 6 of quarterback drop percentage was Baker Mayfield, about 10%. I think Andy Dalton had a drop percentage of about 9%. He dealt with 4 drops, I think, on 42 attempts. Like 3 of them or 2 of them came within the first 2 drives, and that really kind of impacted his box score in the first quarter. But he finished the first half, I think, 60% completion percentage, that touchdown, over 100 yards, dealing with the rain and the drops from AJ Green and Cody Core. It was very impressive to see him play well against an opponent that he doesn't normally do well against. And that was the reason why they were in the game for as long as they were. The defense had struggles, but they kept them in the game long enough. And it was just weird mistakes down the stretch from, I don't know if it was the play calling or it was just some miscommunication with the scheme or whatever. But, they are competitive when Dalton can play up to the level of the opposite quarterback. And, for so many years, obviously Ben Roethlisberger has been the superior quarterback in this matchup. So when Dalton, finally played at a competent level that matched Ben, the game was close throughout, and they at least had a chance to win. And they almost did win because of Andy Dalton's clutch heroics again on another fourth quarter comeback drive.
Yep, and he hit a number of different receivers. Wasn't just AJ Green. He hit Tyler Boyd, obviously, for the go-ahead touchdown. AJ Green did have, I believe, a catch or 2 on that drive. CJ Uzomah had another. CJ Uzomah stepping up nicely, which is good to see. And I think we all knew that his athleticism and his size, he had that in him. It's more of a growth opportunity type of thing. So it's good to see him growing into a role where the Bengals need a weapon. With Tyler Kroft out, Tyler Eifert out, CJ Uzomah, please stay healthy, sir, because that is he's playing well. He's had some injury issues in the past, and the Bengals are really thin at that position at the moment. Speaking of injuries, this is kind of where a major point of debate comes in, John, for this game. Yeah, it was very close. Some people believe that the Steelers aren't the same team that they've been this year and in years past. Obviously, the Bengals are far improved from the past 2 years. The Bengals still lose this game at home. And with it come the call, the non-call at the end of the game, the offensive pass interference that should have been called. A number of different outlets have said that. There's other, a lot of Bengals fans are talking about holding calls by the offensive line that weren't called on Bengals defensive linemen. There are those issues. We've seen calls go the Steelers' way in the past. There's also the myriad of injuries. Cincinnati went into this game without John Ross, without Billy Price, without Tyler Eifert, without Tyler Kroft, without Giovanni Bernard. Guys on defense left the game regularly, and some for the rest of the game. But I look at it as, yeah, you've lost a lot of starters. You've lost a lot of guys you rotate in heavily. But your defensive line, you still had all your starters, and you've got a borderline, if not a true Hall of Fame player in Geno Atkins, who was a ghost. Mm-hmm. You had Carlos Dunlap, who was a ghost, a 3-time Pro Bowl player. You had Vontaze Burfict. Yes, he's working his way into game shape. Yeah, he made a couple of nice plays, but I saw him get punked around quite a bit by James Conner, Vance McDonald and others.
Mm-hmm.
The defense failed to secure a turnover again. I'm rambling here on this question, but I'm laying it out for you because you have to weigh. A lot of fans say we got ripped off, right? A lot of fans are saying the Bengals got ripped off because of that OPI call and all of that. I don't dismiss that. I don't doubt that. But you have to look at other things that transpired in the game. Injuries being one, but the lack of defensive plays, and then, like you mentioned, the drops by Cody Core, other issues. I mean, how much of this loss is on, hey, maybe the Bengals aren't as good as we thought at that 4-1 mark going into this game, and how much of it is refs, injuries, and kind of those built-in excuses?
Yeah, those excuses I think have weight when if the Bengals are like 15-2 against the Steelers at home instead of 2-15, they found 10,000 ways to lose. So, common excuses like injuries and refs that at the start they don't have much weight in my opinion. And then you have to look at this, like, when do the Bengals ever get calls against the Steelers? That never happens. That you can't go into this game specifically, if you're a Bengals fan, with that mindset, expecting that the refs are going to call, evenly for both ways. And for the most part, they did, because the Steelers didn't get a James Conner touchdown when they should have. That took off 4 points off the board. There was another call, I think, earlier where the Juju Smith-Schuster touchdown was pretty close. There was a lot of back and forth calls, and I don't think, if you're a Bengals fan, that you can expect to get even calls if that's the narrative that's growing from that. And it's just easy, when you constantly lose to a team, to find, secondary excuses like injuries and like refs that are the main causes of the game. But you can also just look at what went wrong for your team. And in my opinion, it was two main things. It was the way that they addressed the rushing game and the relationship between the pass rush and the secondary for the Bengals. And starting with the rushing game, Joe Mixon had 5 rushes with Andy Dalton under center. Only one of them was deemed successful. He had 6 rushes in shotgun, and 5 of them were successful. He was way more proficient in getting a lot more yards running out of the shotgun than he was out of center. And I don't know if they were trying to establish like play action by having Mixon run out of center, but I do know that the 3 sacks that the Bengals offensive line allowed came off of play action. So it was a systematic failure in terms of attacking the Steelers defense with the run game that only ended up having 11 rushes, and they averaged 6.5 yards, but most of those, a good portion of those carries were with under center, and they gained, 0, they didn't deem successful plays. So that was, in my opinion, the problem on the offense, because they tried to force the passing game a lot, and for the most part it was successful, but they didn't have a proper complementary rushing attack against a defense that, obviously knows them and knows their strengths. And you mentioned the lack of pass rush, and I do agree that Geno and Dunlap could have done a lot more, but I also think that compounded with the injuries in the secondary, the Bengals back 7 just could not allow easy separation from their tight ends and from Juju Smith-Schuster. It was just a constant issue all game, and that's why Ben was getting the ball out of the pocket so quickly, completely negating the pass rush in the first place. And the Steelers, even with a new offensive coordinator, they do a great job of designing, schemes and route combinations that create space for the primary options. And what I saw from the defense was just a group of linebackers that I've never seen look more lost in coverage, specifically with Perfect, Preston Brown. Vincey Ray tries, but he's just not that athlete to do it anymore. And even with Burfict, who many fans would claim is a good coverage linebacker, he doesn't look comfortable in space out there, handling those crossing routes, getting guys into the zone. Vance McDonald had a field day because Burfict was constantly out of position in coverage. And that was just a main problem. And I don't even blame the defense that much, because they only gave up 20 points in 58 minutes of football against a competent Steelers offense. That should have been enough for the offense to win the game. But like I said, that lack of efficient rushing attack, putting your best running back in the best position to succeed, they just couldn't do that. And I think those 2 issues were, in my opinion, just the main reasons why they didn't put up more points than they should have. That game should not have come down to the last drive, and they should have had more than 21 points at the end of the game. I get the injuries, I get the refs, but sometimes you just got to look in the mirror and say, what could we have done better? And I think it was those 2 things.
Yeah, and for Mixon, he was absolutely gashing the Steelers defense on delays, on draws out of those shotgun formations. I mean, it was almost like God, like 10, 15 yards a carry at sometimes. And then, there were other times, especially early in the game, where it wasn't working very well. And then the Bengals kind of abandoned things in the third quarter on the ground, which, was not good. And obviously Mark Walton was ineffective. Definition of irony, you talk about how the Bengals should have scored more than 21 points in the game. In the Marvin Lewis era, if I remember correctly, based on I think something that our good friend James Rapine threw out there, the Bengals had never scored more than 20 points against the Steelers in the Marvin Lewis era. They scored 21 to go up in less than a minute and a half, and they still lose. So,
it's not the 90s anymore. Teams just average high 20 points a game. You can't win games like this.
Yeah, and I think your point about Mixon is really evident in that first drive of the second half. And there's a lot. Number one, Erickson gets a 51-yard kickoff return, which is awesome. Sets the Bengals up very well. The Bengals are then in a 3rd and 2, I believe. They don't get it. And they're in Steelers territory, bad weather. I get it. I get where you could say, hey, we're at home, we punt. But I feel like the crossing routes and out routes to Boyd, the short ones, worked all day. I think you got A.J. Green out there. Mixon can do a number of different things. And I think that if you can't get a yard and a half, 2 yards on your home turf, maybe you don't deserve to win. But I think that is a spot. I think that is a spot that many fans question why Marvin Lewis did not go for it. And I think also the big thing, the Bengals had big momentum going in and out of halftime because of that last second touchdown pass they scored right before the half. So your thoughts and your analysis of that drive and other situations in the game where you maybe thought, Marvin, grow a pair, let's do this, and kind of impose the will. Even if it leads to a field goal or 2 field goals, you get some points, you're in a different situation at the end of the game.
It's cowardice, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I probably should have mentioned it with my first point. But yeah, that's another gigantic reason why they lost, because they accepted defeat, and I can't beat around the bush with that point. If you punt from within your own 50-yard line 3 times during the game, and one of those punts was I think only 28 yards, and they give up a field goal on the defensive drive anyways, that's accepting defeat. You're playing not to lose. At home, I don't understand. It's a mentality. It's mental shrinkness. It's not even a word. I'm totally flabbergasted, because it's just a constant issue under Marvin Lewis, and it's not going to get better until it does. And he's shown no signs of ever doing anything better. And it's always against the Steelers. It's always this shrinking in big moments, and just not, the antithesis of Sean McVay, basically, who 2 weeks ago was playing at Century League Stadium in Seattle. He had a 4th and 1 situation at the Seahawks 40, and he went for it, and he got it, and they ended up winning the game, because after the game he said, "We don't fear failure." I can't say the same thing about Marvin Lewis, especially when he plays the Steelers, a team that he just can't beat, with 65,000 fans supporting him right then and there. I'll never understand it, but I will always expect it at this point, because it's just not going to change until it does.
Well, John, you're the king of the segue, and we're gonna get to another question about this Steelers game and this quote unquote rivalry in just a second. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza, and we're breaking down the Bengals' heartbreaking loss 28-21 against the Steelers. Hard-fought game, but Bengals still managed to come up short for a variety of different reasons. We're going to open up the phone lines in just a few minutes here, and the text line if you want to get in touch with us, 949-542-6241, 949-542-6241. So get those in. We've already got Twitter questions coming our way, and we'll get to those. We're going to do middle of the show calls, texts, and stuff. We want to make this a bit more of a soundboard episode for the listeners this week, because Steelers game, it's a big deal, and there's a lot to be frustrated about. There's a lot to be happy about as well. So John, as I mentioned, you had a nice segue here into our next point, which is, what is it going to take for this rivalry to balance out? And I mean, if Marvin was, I don't know, 6-12 at home, or 8-10, just under, if he was slightly under 500 in this, and you say, hey, Pittsburgh's just been a better team, I just, for the life of me, I don't understand why this team is so difficult for the Bengals to beat. And I'm going to come up with a couple of different thoughts or scenarios, and you tell me your thoughts on them, because I wrote an article on Cincy Jungle kind of explaining some of the things about the problems with this rivalry and what the Bengals need to do to maybe start addressing some of these things. But I mean, you go up with under a minute and a half and you lose, right? You think you have the wild card game sealed up a couple of years ago. All Jeremy Hill has to do is fall down and hang on to the ball. He doesn't have to gain yards. He can lose yards. Mm-hmm. Just hang on to the football, chew clock, try a field goal, you win. That doesn't work, and then you implode on the ensuing defensive possession. You go back to, oh my God, 2006. At the end of that season, the Bengals needed to win one game. They lost like 3 or 4 in a row. The last one, of course, being against Pittsburgh. They get knocked out of the playoffs. 2005, the Palmer thing. Some of it has to do with the bad luck and the injuries, and some people will say, of course, so the Steelers are cheap shots, and that's the injuries. And sure, I've been there myself, to be quite honest with you. Yeah. But I mean, at some point, what is it going to take for this team? I mean, I did some historical research for this post. I looked back to from 1980 to 1990, which was kind of the Bengals heyday, right? They went to 2 Super Bowls. Boomer, they had both Ken Anderson and Boomer. They were a very successful team in that stretch. In that stretch, basically, Steelers had, kind of an iffy quarterback situation with a guy named Mark Malone, and then late 80s Bubby Brister, if you remember those names. Somehow the Steelers still made the playoffs 4 times in that span, and actually made an AFC championship game in that span. But Cincinnati largely dominated the division, largely dominated the series, and they went 15-6 in that span. I counted the games. So is it basically going to take Pittsburgh to have Ben Roethlisberger retire, Mike Tomlin be out the door, and finally Cincinnati's like, well, they're good, their best players, their Hall of Fame players are gone. Maybe now we have a chance. Is it the coach? Is it, like you mentioned, certain personnel in this defense? Is it a combination? I mean, this is honestly ridiculous.
No, it is, and I'll say something that not a lot of fans would agree with, but I guess I'll say that for the end. It takes a culture change, and it's one of the reasons why a lot of us wanted Marvin out the door, because they play the Steelers twice, and we can guarantee that they're going to lose one every single year, and that can't be acceptable from a professional football team's standards. It's just with him always here, there's always the shadow of a doubt that he is going to lead a team that shrinks when it matters the most against the team that they care about so much to beat. But I don't even know if I can say that. Do they really care about beating them, or do they really care about not losing to them? It's almost like just in this rivalry, and specifically from the past 4 years, it just feels like hate has consumed them. And that's why they let Burfict out on free leash to do whatever he wants, even if he's not exactly good. And he wasn't really good against the Steelers this past Sunday. There's no control with him, and there's just no progress being gained from Lewis and just learning from his mistakes against them. And he seems to make a new one every single time they play them. So it just takes, a different approach on this. And the best way I can think of that is just getting someone from outside of the organization who is just unfamiliar with what goes on here. And obviously I'm talking about not promoting from within, if there ever is a new head coach, because Marvin will be here for as long as he wants to be. And if he continues to try to beat the Steelers up into his 80s, then he's going to continue trying to beat the Steelers up into his 80s, yeah, and will be 0-24 by the time that happens, because he just can't learn from his own mistakes. Because I just think it takes somebody with a different approach to try to do that. And I also think that, like there was an article on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette that said that Ben Roethlisberger cares about this game a lot, not only because of the connection that he has with Ohio, but also beating Vontaze Burfict, and because of now the inner rivalry between Burfict and some of the Steelers players because of the recent events that happened there. If Burfict doesn't do enough good things on the football field like we saw on Sunday, what is the value of him in this rivalry? He only gives the Steelers more inner motivation to beat them. And obviously Burfict fueled the fire with, threatening Juju and pointing at him, and the hit on Antonio Brown that he could get punished for. The value with Burfict at this point is just, it's so hard to justify. And I think that he, along with Lewis, are just both two pegs of the problem here. And if they go away, I could be confident that they could eventually move forward and gain some progress in this matchup, because the Steelers have a formula that works, and it's just basically let the Bengals implode on themselves, because they just it's so sad, because it's just so obvious how much the Bengals hate them, and it's unfortunate that they can't get out of their own way to do something about it. And I think it's just a product of having familiar faces here that just haven't learned from their own mistakes.
I mean, we could sit here and have a whole episode on Vontaze Burfict, especially after this week. And I'm thinking and hoping, and I'm sure that just a few minutes here, when we start getting to some of these listener questions, some of them will be about Burfict, his value, and all of that. But I do want to add him in just kind of a different way and ask you about this. You're a guy who watches a lot of film and does an awesome job of breaking down a lot of stuff. And for those of you who do not follow John on Twitter and or have read some of his film breakdown throughout Cincy Jungle, I urge you to do that. Very good stuff. Definitely not one of my strengths. So I am jealous and envious of you that you are quite good at that. But here's my thing. Okay. You talked about the coaching and all that kind of stuff, and the Bengals shooting themselves in the foot. Yes, that's happened. But the Bengals have and employ kind of a passe, by NFL standards, 4-3. Yeah, their base is usually nickel, but a 4-3 front defensive scheme. They don't really change much up there. The Steelers have a different, varying look on defense. They've got their three big guys on the defensive line, and they blitz a lot of different guys, Dupree and Watt, and, they do a lot of different things up front. That's what the Patriots do as well on defense. There's been a big, in my opinion, now I don't have the stats in front of me, but it just seems, in looking at these games, there's been a big disparity in terms of how those two matchups work out for each team. It seems as if the Cincinnati Bengals, and I'm even going back when the Bengals still had Whitworth and Zeitler, okay? The Bengals had matchup problems still with those speed guys off the edge, multiple guys coming at them, getting the right assignments. There's always been pressure on their quarterbacks. It's not just Andy Dalton. It was Carson Palmer. I saw it. Trust me. Now, there are other times where, the big guys for the Bengals, Dunlap, Atkins, they've hit Ben regularly and all that kind of stuff. They've got pressure on him, but other times Ben does Ben things, runs around and plays backyard football and throws up a prayer, and somehow it's a 30-yard gain. But there is a major disparity there that Cincinnati has not been able to work out. And even with these guys that are Pro Bowl guys up front, I mean, it's just the consistency in those areas, even when they've had some of their strongest players, it hasn't worked. And yet somehow for the Steelers, it has worked. And it also goes back to the run game, right? The Steelers, whether it's I look back, Willie Parker had 100-yard days against the Bengals. Jerome Bettis had 100-yard days against the Bengals. Le'Veon Bell obviously had. Then this week, James Conner. I mean, it doesn't stop. So, is that an indictment of Lewis? Is that an indictment of a scheme? Because I find it hard to believe that a guy who cut his teeth for over a decade and a half in this division and built his reputation on a record-setting defense with amazing linebackers, a 3-4 defense with a lot of blitzers. I don't know why that hasn't carried over. And he has these standard run stuffing type of guys like Perfect, and there's not a lot of diversity showing on the defensive side of the ball at times.
Yeah, and
does that make sense when I'm getting at?
Yeah, and that's a valid point. And I guess to your point about the Steelers run game, they've always been very power oriented with a lot of guards pulling across the line of scrimmage, and that's why DeCastro has been so successful there, because he's like the best in the NFL at doing so. And that's why, like, even if like retired Cedric Benson was behind that Steelers offensive line, I would still have expected him to run for 100 yards. Because like there's like names that didn't, like Jonathan Dwyer, Rashard Mendenhall, they all had successful games against the Bengals. No matter what defense was here, no matter if Zimmer was here, or, the good days of Paul Gunther, even with Terrell Austin, they just seem to have a lot of guys who are gap disciplined but can't make impact plays in those gaps, and they're routinely one of the worst teams at getting tackles for loss. Because like with Geno, he gets a lot of sacks, but he doesn't make a lot of splash plays in the run. Dunlap has a little bit more than him because he plays on the edge and it's a little bit easier. But besides those two, they don't have a lot of guys that can shed blocks quickly and fill those gaps quickly. And as a result, there's a lot of 2 to 4 yard carries for the Steelers and just any other opponent, but there's not a lot of negative plays. And that basically allows them to just pound the ball consistently because they know they're going to get a guaranteed 2 to 5 yards every play. And that's why the yards per carry is not astronomical, but they end up with like 110, 130 yards a game every single time. So I think that's definitely something that always needed to change. And I don't know if it's a scheme thing or just a personnel thing, but it's always been a constant with Lewis. And just with that Steelers defensive front, like when they had a competent secondary, and besides Joe Hayden, they don't really have that now. Like they could just drop back 7, 8 guys in coverage, blitz 3 or just rush 3 or 4. And, if Dalton's first read when he was, younger, if it wasn't open, then he kind of got skittish against a 3-man rush and ended up, this fever everywhere and guys weren't getting open downfield. And that's kind of the crux of a lot of those bad Dalton games. But, now that the Steelers don't have that great secondary, they had to do more as a pass rushing unit. They had to send 5 to 6 guys to get Dalton to get the ball out quicker. And that's why he only had, I think, like 5.6 yards per attempt in this game, despite, the high quarterback rating, the 2-0 touchdown interception ratio. So there was adjustments that the Steelers made on the defense side of the ball because of their lack of personnel. And it's just something that we can't say about the Bengals, because even with, plethora of injuries that happened in the back 7, linebackers that continued to not be effective in zone coverage over the middle, and a pass rush that just couldn't get there in time, it was just, kind of sticking to their guns, and they kind of ended up getting broken on that final drive.
Yeah, I stuck to my guns is probably going to be on Marvin Lewis's headstone at this point. I mean, it's just like, oh my God. I'm glad you brought up Hayden. I thought that even though it wasn't the prettiest of performances by a lot of high-profile cornerbacks on the field, I thought he played admirably at times against A.J. Green, which, if you know anything about that rivalry.
Just in that first drive, too, I think it was like 3 incompletions that were targeted towards Hayden. It was impressive. Yep,
Hayden played well. And you know what? William Jackson and Dre Kirkpatrick, they both battled injuries, and I thought Kirkpatrick had some struggles. But I also saw him knock away quite a few passes, and he was there. I just thought it was and you can sit there and you can knock Drake Kirkpatrick, which is easy to do. You can knock William Jackson for not maybe playing as at high of a level as last year. But when you're going up against Juju Smith-Schuster and Antonio Brown, it's never an easy task.
Mm-hmm.
The touchdown and the big play that Antonio Brown had, we mentioned the offensive pass interference thing. So that kind of takes those guys out of the equation. I just thought, just in general, those 3 guys gutted out a really – it wasn't pretty.
Oh, yeah.
At every time, but I thought all 3 of them gutted out on both sides of the fence. I thought they all gutted out a really, really, really solid performance.
I thought the game that Kirkpatrick had was like perfect for him, because he had like 2 or 3 great plays down the field guarding Smith-Schuster and Brown, and then he missed gigantically on a press on Brown and ended up having like a 48-yard sling.
Yeah.
It was like it was the perfect Kirkpatrick performance, and that's basically what we can expect.
Yeah, and then there was, again, if you want to point out some things that the officials did, that there was kind of an iffy holding
illegal
call.
contact or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, at the end of the game on the last drive, which, I mean, you've seen it called and you've seen less egregious, or it's another one of those issues. Let's get to a couple of these YouTube comments here. We're going to get to some calls and texts. You can get in touch with us, 949-542-6241. We're going to open that up for you. So 949-542-6241. I want to start with Carl Benson because he was up top here in the live YouTube chat, and just something that's funny for you, John. He said, gosh, what did he say? I had many days studying in that library, John. So he knows.
Oh, it's old. Yeah.
He knows the plight of studying in the University of Cincinnati library there. Let's see here. Well, just real quick, Antonio DeSandro, first time tuning into this live podcast. I'm digging it. Houday, that's awesome. Thanks. There's a lot of also talk of Bill Williams has some good points. Some others talk about, like, Marvin isn't the only guy who struggled against the Steelers. Mike Brown all time versus the Steelers, 14 wins, 41 losses. I think someone else said something about the 1990s. I mean, obviously that was, but the entire point, and I think this is kind of something that we can start to sort of wrap a bow on this here. The entire point of the frustration with this, again, it's the rivalry, it's all that kind of stuff. But in a year where the Bengals seem to have taken a lot of steps, right? They beat a pretty good, they're 4-2. They got the same record as the Bengals. They beat a pretty good Ravens team on primetime, right? They beat a Dolphins team who was also 4-2. Decent win. They've come from behind. The point is, part of it is just the desire to win this game because of the hatred for the Steelers. But as you pointed out, John, this is the route you need to take to not only get to the playoffs, to get a division crown, but to get through the playoffs. Because these are the teams that are there. The Patriots, the Steelers, sometimes the Ravens, the Chiefs coming up. I mean, these are the teams that the Bengals will have to face and beat in order to get that ever-elusive playoff win. And I think that's why people, it's week 6, and you can kind of say, dude, the more important one could be week 17, and very well could be the truth. But still, these are the types of games that you need to win. These are the types of games you need to get into the playoffs, get home field advantage, all that kind of stuff. And like you said, they can't seem to do it.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. They could win 12 games this year, but those 4 losses could be this one next week on Sunday Night Football, maybe like one against like the Ravens or another good team, and then one more against the Steelers. So they have 12 wins. They might even have a bye, but even with those, they're true tests during the year. What if they all fail? How much confidence can you really have in this group of players and coaches that they're going to be able to get it done when it matters the most? And to me, it's just like it's like 2 freshmen in high school. Like one guy just pounds on the other, like in the hallway. The other dude who gets pounded, like, goes into the gym for like 3 years. They both meet up in senior year. And like the little guy is like benching like 300 pounds. He's like practicing boxing. He's like ready to do anything, and he's like beating up the rest of the school. And at this point, and he finally meets up that bully from freshman year, and he still gets knocked on his ass like after one punch. It's basically the relationship. Like, they can do anything else. They can play well against any other team, but this is the one team that kind of matters for their psyche, and they just can't seem to do it. And it's just unfortunate.
Yeah, and like I said, Marvin Lewis has been in this division for a long time. He's coached in this realm for a long time, and for some reason he's found a way to beat Baltimore pretty consistently. He's found a way to beat Cleveland pretty consistently, and now he's 8-25 against the Steelers, 2-16 at home. Pitiful. I mean, that's pitiful. We'll see what happens in Week 17. Like I said, that could be an incredibly large game for both playoff appearances, winning the division, home field advantage. I mean, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves because the Bengals, they still have a lot to show us. But a 4-2 start, and this roster is a solid one. Some places are very banged up. Some places are really starting, they'll start to get healthy as the year goes on, but we'll see. One side note, John, and I wanted to ask you about this. I've seen a lot of up and down play from Trey Hopkins, some up in the weeks going up to this game against the Steelers, quite a bit of down against the Steelers.
Mm-hmm.
Billy Price, still, we don't know when he's coming back. He did get the boot off this week. He might not play for the Chiefs this Sunday, but what's the plan? I mean, Alex Redmond leads. I think he leads all guards with pressures given up. He's got to be up there in holding penalties because it seems to be that's a weekly given.
Mm-hmm.
Is there? Do you think the Bengals are sitting here saying, maybe we should go Hopkins at right guard again, Price at center when we come back, or will they just kind of say we got to keep it what it was and leave it as it is? Is there even a big increase in productivity with Hopkins at guard, or even maybe Price at guard?
Yeah.
But however that may work.
I thought I was after the Panthers game when Hopkins had a game and a half under his belt. I was pretty set on the best plan of action would be having Price go to guard, a position that a lot of Ohio State fans will also attest to this, that he was better at than he was at center. He was obviously mostly a center prospect when he entered the draft, and many people scouted him as a center. And if he went out as a guard, I think he would have been a slightly more highly regarded prospect because I think his tape was better at guard. And some of his issues, early on in the preseason and the game and a half, were primarily issues with getting out of his stance after snapping the ball. And I think that moving him to guard would mitigate some of those issues. But regardless, I think all that's pretty moot. I think Hopkins is going back to the bench because he is that primary backup center and basically backup interior lineman. I think Price will retake his spot at center because they kind of made their bet with that. They said they only are looking at him at center, and I guess they didn't quite expect Redmond to be this bad in pass protection, but they'll also look at the good plays that he's made in the run game, and there are some. I do think he has value there, but I think in 2018 it's more valuable to have five competent pass protectors than 5 competent run blockers, because you can scheme around the run game and with the run game 9 ways to Sunday, but you got to be able to pass protect, and I think that Price gives them the best option at center for that. Even though Hopkins showed signs, he was really inconsistent against the Dolphins and Steelers. But there's obviously the Westerman option, but that's just also even less likely. I just think that Redmond is going to keep the spot once Price comes back. And as much as I would like to see Price step in at right guard, I just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. We're getting a call on the OBI line here, John. So hang on one second. We'll get to that. But good point on the offensive line. Hi, it's the Orange and Black Insider. Who's this?
Hey, John from Kentucky. How you doing, Anthony and John? How y'all?
We're hanging in there, my friend. How you doing?
Oh, well, I'm just ascending, and I'm kind of hanging in there. Hey, Anthony, you know the difference between a risk and a gamble. A gamble, if you're 4th and 28 on your own 8-yard line against Pittsburgh, you might want to punt it. That's a gamble. But if you're on the Pittsburgh 40-yard line and it's starting the second half, that's a risk. And that's a risk you have to take. And I know you guys were talking about that earlier. And that's why we are so frustrated with this head coach. Because if you're not going to risks against these kinds of teams. You don't win in the playoffs. You don't beat Pittsburgh. You most certainly don't go to Super Bowls. So that's my rant and frustration for the moment.
Well, it's a valid one, John, and we're getting a lot of calls here, so we're gonna get you off the air in just a second here. But I think it's a valid one. I think, as we mentioned, Marvin Lewis has, in that game, had opportunities to go for it. And, I can understand later in the game, maybe things are pretty tight. And, you kind of say, hey, let's kind of punt the ball. Let's play field position. It's raining. We are at home, all that kind of thing. My thing is, I'm a big momentum guy. And as we mentioned here, some people don't believe in momentum being an actual thing in sports. I personally, I think it's a gigantic thing. I think it builds confidence. I think all of that. And I think that Marvin Lewis, you get a 50-yard kick return to start the second half after you marched down the field and scored a touchdown before the half, and then you sit on the ball and punt it on a third and short. I think that deflates your football team. I really do. And I think you lose the momentum that you gathered before the halftime gun.
Absolutely.
And I think that's –
Marvin Lewis said, well, I didn't want to give the ball back to Pittsburgh right there. Well, he did give the ball back to Pittsburgh right there.
Yep.
Yeah, he punted it, but still.
Punts or turnovers. Punts or
You
turnovers.
tell me with the talent you had, you don't have enough confidence to get 1 yard on the other team's 40-yard line to start the second half? I mean, the average owner in the NFL, you better believe he's having words with that coach on Monday morning. But evidently, the one we have, he's evidently satisfied with all this.
well. We're gonna
You're getting a lot of. Oh, go ahead.
No. I appreciate it, John. We're gonna finish this question off the air. Appreciate you calling in. Great to hear from you as always. There's definitely more to talk about here, but hopefully you enjoy the Sunday night football game. We'll be talking about the Chiefs in just a little bit here, so definitely stay tuned for that. Appreciate the call, sir. John on OBI, not John from Kentucky. He makes a great point in that, the Bengals may have deflated, Marvin Lewis may have deflated his team by going that. And you mentioned punts are kind of a form of turning it over.
Yeah, punts are basically 40-yard interceptions. Field goals are turnovers with a participation point. Touchdowns are the only thing that matters. Like turnovers, they say they're only fumbles and interceptions. Punts are also part of turnovers. And mind you, it was a 28-yard punt. So it's like in an era where analytics is king, the expected risk of just going for it on a 4th and 1, it's so monumentally lower than just giving the ball back 28 yards down the field. So that line of thinking is just so outdated, and I think that perfectly encapsulates who Marvin Lewis is as a coach.
Yeah, totally. And what I wanted to get to was, you spend a second-round pick on your quarterback, you spend a first-round pick on a center, you spend a top 5 pick on a wide receiver, a second-round pick on another wide receiver, multiple second-round picks on running backs. Granted, not everybody's on the field at this point, but you have invested a lot of draft capital at skill positions for these type of situations, and you punt. I don't get that. We've got another call here, John. I believe it's from good friend Andrew Seiler. Andrew, how are you, sir?
Good. How are you guys doing?
We're reeling from the loss, but we're doing all right.
Oh, man, me too. I was at the game, man. I was 114, section 114.
Oh, wow.
I almost was in tears.
Wait, what?
Good Lord. But I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say I love you guys. I love this show, and I love the Cincinnati Bengals, and wanted to be positive. I really think, man, Dalton's going to be the MVP of this game on Sunday. 4 touchdowns and 400 yards. I'm calling it right now.
Okay. Well, that was actually where I was going with the next question. First of all, we love you back, buddy. Appreciate it. That's very flattering to hear that. But I will say this, and I guess because you have because you've given us a little bit of an Andy Dalton impression. I'll get to your score prediction in just a second, but just to harp on your point a little bit about Andy Dalton, I did some math. He's basically he's got 14 touchdowns through 6 games so far this year. It puts him on pace for 37 touchdown passes this season. Who knows if he'll keep that up, but that will break his own franchise record for single season passing touchdowns. And that says a lot. He also surpassed Boomer Esiason this last Sunday for passing yards as career passing yards as a Bengal. So quickly, Andrew, we've got some other calls, but before we do, your prediction for Sunday.
Prediction for Sunday?
Yes.
35, or actually no, 34, lucky number. 34-21. I'm going for it, man. I think William Jackson and Dre stand up. Hopefully Sean Williams can play. Jesse Bates. I mean, I think we'll all be all right.
Cool.
But do not play Cody Core. Get him off the field.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Andrew. We'll get you off the air here, but appreciate you calling in. Appreciate the compliments, right. And hopefully the next game you go to will have a little bit better results.
Oh yeah, I'm hoping.
Thanks, buddy. We missed a couple of calls. I apologize if I missed your call there. Call back. We'll get to you. Like I said, we want to make this pretty listener heavy. We do have one going on. Any additional thoughts about Andy Dalton, John, with what Andrews had to say there?
Yeah, 400 yards and 4 touchdowns is enough to get past Mahomes. I'll take it, but I do think that's probably what Mahomes is going to get as well. It's just 2 of the worst defenses in the NFL. And on a Sunday night stage, if he does that, then I think he'll answer or at least snuff out a lot of narratives, because this is going to be a shootout and it might have a lot of long drives, but in the end, it's going to be probably around 700 total yards of offense between 2 teams. So that's going to be the performance that Dalton really needs.
Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't watch the Patriots-Chiefs game, and I luckily I was doing something kind of unique and fun myself Sunday night, but it was that score. We kind of my brother and I were together, and we kind of kept our eye on the score. And we're going, oh my God, this is crazy. This is obviously this has all the makings of a shootout going forward. The Bengals' deep passing defense is one of the worst in the league, and the Chiefs' defense, I believe, is the worst in the league. So and Andy Dalton's having a good year. Patrick Mahomes is having an outstanding year. So a lot to talk about there. We're going to get to that in just a second. We've got another call on the OBI line from our good friend Terrell. Terrell, how are you, sir?
How you doing, guys?
Hanging in there. How about you?
Oh, yeah, same here. We all know that the Bengals had a nail biter, but I just feel like we still got a good team. We still got a pretty good team. I know we down with injuries and some coach mistakes and a little bit of other things, but I think we're going to do all right. And what I was going to say was some 2 quick things. I already consider when we're going to get it for the next year's draft. Like 3 biggest things: offensive line, either guard or tackle. I could say tight end and a tackling linebacker. And my other thing was I'm ready to trade John Ross for Amari Cooper for a 5th-round pick.
Why is that?
Something similar to like I can't, like, you know how the Browns traded the running back like 3 or 4 years ago. I forgot his name.
Trent Richardson.
Yeah, that's who John Ross is to us. That's what I feel. I'm sorry. I mean, at least a 5th-round pick or a 4th for John Ross, or like a strong short tackling linebacker.
Well, it's not the craziest idea in the world. We'll get you off the air here, Terrell. I know my buddy John here is a good film guy and draft guy, so we'll talk about your question off the air. Appreciate you calling in, my friend. John, I think we're giving up on John Ross a little too early, in my opinion. Now, I think if we're talking this point next year, early in the season before the trade deadline, and John Ross still has yet to make an impact, then I think that's a viable conversation. I think we need to give him, a full year's schedule at least to kind of see, and a year later trading a number 9 overall pick for a mid-round pick. I don't know if that makes sense, and who knows if there's even demand out there at this point for him. So that's one thing. I do think Terrell has valid points with guard, tackle, tight end, linebacker being the team's biggest needs. Your thoughts on both of his areas he brought up?
Didn't we just have this conversation 2 weeks ago?
Feel like it.
I get it. He's injury prone. He can't stay healthy. It may not be the extent of Tyler Eifert, but he runs, he pulls a muscle. He's out for 2 weeks. I get it. Still, he's 22, 23 years old, and he has immense value to the offense. Give him time. We just had this conversation 2 weeks ago. I'm not going to continue on about that. But definitely right tackle, right guard, any linebacker who can play in space. Definite needs for the Bengals, and John Ross is still needs for the Bengals. And if they get rid of him for a second or third round pick, the odds of finding another guy who can do what he does when he's on the field, it's minimal. So I don't agree with it, but because of how much needed he is in the offense, because the Miami game I think was noticeable, and I think they could have had a lot more success against the Steelers in the passing game with Ross on the field. So give him time.
Year 2, I'm not open to it, especially in a year where you've already lost Eifert. Croft's going to be gone for a long time. You saw what Cody Core did when John Ross wasn't on the field. Josh Malone, who I was really big on, has done nothing. It's basically been the Tyler Boyd, AJ Green show. So, and I think both yourself and our good friend Joe Goodberry have shown some things on Twitter and whatnot to show at least what he does as a decoy, what he brings as a decoy on the field because of his speed. So I think you still got to say, hey, the Bengals, if you match up AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, and John Ross as a trio of wide receivers against much of the league, I think that's a top 3, top 5 trio in terms of overall talent and everything in this league. So I think you got to leave that alone, especially with the Eifert injury, the Croft injury, and all of that. I totally agree with Terrell's assessment of needs. I think, and I wrote this in a post on Cincy Jungle. I think that, man, that middle part of the defense, the linebackers, even some safety help. I mean, they still can't cover tight ends. They can't cover. Kenyon Drake had a receiving touchdown against them the week prior. They need those athletic guys, and whether it's a tweener safety linebacker like a Dion Buchanan or like what who is it, Mark Barron does for kind of the Rams. I mean, whether it's getting a guy like that, they need to have someone there. And they have Bates, but Bates is learning on the fly right now.
Right.
I just kind of think that they need some of these guys and some of those types of guys in today's NFL.
And I think that it was like an anonymous defense coordinator was on record saying today that the modern NFL defense is more focused on forcing turnovers than limiting yards because of the way that the offensive game has evolved. So I understand that, every team gives up a lot of chunk plays over the middle. That's just the way that the offenses, are operated now. But at the same time, you still need to have playmakers who can cover lots of ground over the middle of the field. And that's just something that they don't have. For the longest time, we've been asking for them to get those space players, whether it's linebackers or safeties, that can cover a lot of ground from number to number, from sideline to sideline, and they just haven't been able to get that. And to add on to Terrell's point, I also think that another edge player might be needed because Jordan Willis still hasn't shown really anything, and for as fun that Sam Hubbard has been, in the splash plays, he still needs to show that he can produce pressure as well, because sometimes it's just Carl Lawson and Carlos Dunlap doing it all, and there's no one really behind him to force any consistent pressure. I think Willis is kind of on the hot seat here because he hasn't been dealing with injuries, but he hasn't really shown the necessary progress pass rusher.
Yeah, and that was another guy I was excited about. It kind of reminds me back in, 2012 when the Bengals selected both Devin Still and Brandon Thompson. I thought both those guys would be, really good players for this Bengals defense, and Thompson was okay at his peak and still God bless him for everything he's been through and everything. I mean, I can understand why football took maybe a back seat at times, but you kind of hope that being a Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year at some point for Penn State, you kind of figured he had a bright future, but it is what it is. We got a lot of questions. I apologize if we didn't get to everybody's call. We had other calls that we just couldn't get to. If you have some, we'll continue to try and take some as we close up here. We're gonna talk about the Chiefs in just a second. I do want to talk about this though, John. This was a question we received on Twitter at Bengals OBI from our good friend Carlos Andre. There's two things that Carlos Andre brought up. Of course, it's hashtag Fire Marvin time, and he wants to get that to go viral. We talked about Marvin quite a bit on this episode, but it's also Auden Tate time, my friend. Auden Tate. Cody Core dropped a ball that you could have handed. I don't think you could have handed the ball off in a more perfect spot than the ball he dropped on a 3rd and long. Yeah, I mean, it was in stride. It was lofted up nice, right between the numbers, and just absolutely drops it. Then there was another one, tougher catch, contested. He got hit, drops one that would have been another first down. The big one, the 3rd down one, that was huge. I mean, that was just gigantic. And I mean, you don't want to crucify the guy because he's had limited opportunities as it is. So, I mean, it's difficult, but at the same time, big game, big situation. You know your number is going to be called at some point because John Ross is out. You got to step up, right? So now you have Tyler Eifert hurt, Tyler Croft hurt. Core and Malone have been ineffective, so now there's a lot of calling for Auden Tate. Carlos Andre says, do you think they should have activated Tate? One could argue he isn't prepared, but come on, worse than Core, who didn't catch a pass for almost 2 years. I bet he isn't. You kept him for a reason. You like his size. I don't know.
Yeah, and the routes that Core ran, like Auden Tate may not be that refined as a route runner, but I have confidence that Tate can at least box out defenders at that point. It was like a simple little post route and a little over the middle route. Yeah, just a little, like, it's not too complicated.
But it would have been for like 20 yards. I mean, exactly. It was a big play.
Like that's a catch that Tate at Florida State made in his sleep, and for all the knocks that were on him, that's a play that even I would expect him to make. And it's just like if he can't get activated over Core, who's on the team mainly for special teams, but if he's like as bad as they say he is in practice, like it's kind of scary to me. And obviously this is the avenue that we've been down before with young players under Marvin Lewis who maybe aren't as bad, like not in practice as the narrative may seem to be. But it's just odd that, with Ross injured, with the struggles from Core, that we just haven't heard anything about Auden Tate at all in practice. And, it's just hard to predict that changing until we see it happen, because like with any Marvin Lewis decision, it's just impossible to foretell what he's going to do and how he's going to build a team week to week, just from what we see in the past. But yeah, I definitely think that Tate, he at this point, if Ross is still unhealthy, with what Core showed, at the very least, it's Malone's time to get some targets. And if he doesn't do well, then you have to turn to Tate at that point, because you have 7 receivers for a reason. You might as well use them all until you find one competent replacement.
Yeah. And, Core was one of those guys, height, weight, speed. You liked, he didn't have a lot of college production, but you like what he put out there. He was a special teams guy that Marvin Lewis always covets at the back end of running back and wide receiver groups. So that's why he made the team. Auden Tate's still raw, but I would not be surprised, especially if, Croft remains out for a while. Obviously, Eifert's on IR. Maybe John Ross misses some more time. I would not be surprised as the season goes on if you start seeing Auden Tate being on the active list. Now, whether that means he's going to get a lot of passes his way or whatever and take advantage of those opportunities, I don't know. But I would not be surprised if down the road, especially with injuries and all that stuff, if Auden Tate goes forward. We have another listener question that segues nicely into the Chiefs preview. Thank you all for your calls, your texts, your comments in the YouTube chat, live YouTube chat, and Twitter, all of that, and all of the kind comments that you always give us on this program. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, a part of SB Nation's national network. We're proud to be a part of that. You can get this program on iTunes. You can get it on YouTube. You can get it on cincyjungle.com. It's also available on Art19. We're not on SoundCloud anymore, but Art19. And we're on Stitcher. We're on Google Play. I mentioned iTunes. And so a number of different mediums. Check us out. And we want you, if you're able to join us live, we have a live YouTube stream every week. We do this show that is available on our YouTube channel. So subscribe and get alerted to that. Or we're on cincyjungle.com every week as well, so you can check that out. We appreciate all of the support. Obviously, there's been a lot of excitement with some new faces around these parts because of what the Bengals have done this year as opposed to other years. And it's also good to hear from and see some of the old faces from a long time ago and from the beginning of this program showing up both on the phone lines and whatnot. We're going to get out of here in just a few minutes, but this is a question that segues nicely, John, into previewing the Chiefs. And it is from the gentleman who said he was a first-time tuner-inner. And I called him Antonio before, but I believe it's Antonino DeSandro. He says Sunday night will be 44 degrees in Kansas City. I know we're all talking about a shootout, but could the weather work to our advantage against a young quarterback? I think that's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
I think there's a couple of facets here at play. Okay, and I don't want your take. Just kidding. I do want you. I think based on last week, like you said, I think the Bengals abandoned Joe Mixon early and too early and until maybe late when he kind of contributed late. I think the Bengals, as cliche and old school football as it may sound, with that weather being what it is on the road, I think the Bengals will give Mixon far more touches to keep Mahomes and company off of the field. But I also think when you look at, I mean, it's tough to throw the ball in cold weather. I mean, it dies, especially if there's wind. I mean, it's like throwing a big rock. I think when you go arm strength, I think we know who wins that battle.
Yeah,
in cold weather. And then when you go atmosphere, Arrowhead Stadium has been on. I think they shattered a Guinness World Record of being the loudest stadium ever. So I think you can sit here and say, yes, in general, the shootout thing may be overblown, but I don't know if that necessarily means that that's in favor of the Bengals, right?
Yeah, and it's hard to throw the ball in the cold weather. It's also hard to tackle in cold weather. At least it hurts a lot more.
Oh,
and I guess Kansas City has grass instead of turf, so like maybe they have that slight advantage because you're not landing on turf, so it doesn't hurt as much. But even if they can't throw for 500 yards even if Mahomes can't air it out all he wants, they still have a great running back in Kareem Hunt, who is actually right behind Joe Mixon in terms of successful run percentage out of shotgun. And as we know, Andy Reid, he dials up a great scheme, in year in and year out. So he knows how to utilize his players really well. So if the Bengals can, run Mixon into the ground, they might run Kareem Hunt to the ground. And how the Bengals managed to bring a very good running back in Hunt down, who has, great center balance and great yards after contact ability, that might be the underrated big key matchup of the game. And if they can't do that, then Kansas City will still find a way to put up points on the board. So Kansas City is one of those teams that if one thing doesn't work, they have the personnel and the weapons to just do something else and get kind of the same results at the end of the day. So I definitely think that the weather can be a bigger factor than what's maybe some of us thought, because that weather information was new information to me. But I also think that we can't really assume that Kansas City will be held under 30 points just because Mahomes can't throw 10 deep balls to Tyreek Hill during this game. I think that the Chiefs are just too talented on offense that the Bengals defense can't really assume that they'll be able to stop them all game.
Very true. How confident are you in the Bengals defense? I mean, I think we're all not very confident, at least with the back seven, both because of injuries and where they rank in a lot of categories. But how confident are you, even with Darqueze Dennard probably out, Sean Williams potentially out? He sounds like he might be a game-time decision with a concussion type of issue. And the Bengals at least containing Kareem Hunt, their tight end. I mean, Travis Kelce's one of the best in the league. It's really weird to say. I think Tyreek Hill has an Antonio Brown type of factor, speed, all that kind of stuff. Cincinnati has had an up and down record with corralling Antonio Brown at times. They've made him non-factor at times. He was obviously a factor last week, but it's almost to me that Hunt out of the backfield, Kelce as a receiver are two weapons that are almost more scary to me than Tyreek Hill, as weird as that may sound.
No, I think that's a great point. And I think what we're going to find out early in the game, with Sean Williams potentially missing the game, that will insert Clayton Fejedelem into the starting lineup. With him there, I wonder if they just kind of leave Jesse Bates alone in center field, and they run a lot of cover 1, cover 3, and that will put a lot of stress on Bates, making sure that Hill doesn't get over the top of either William Jackson or Drake Kirkpatrick, whichever side he's lined up against. So I think from the Bengals standpoint, their main goal is to not let Hill get over top of them, because he is their best weapon, just in terms of a big playability. And when all that's going on, with the Bengals' struggles to cover the middle field, that even opens it up a lot more for guys like Hunt and Kelce to either be checkdowns or running crossing routes or just doing anything in that extra large vacant space that Tyreek Hill has created. And it's basically the effect that all of us want to see John Ross create for the Bengals offense. And that is scary to me. And to answer your original question, I think that maybe the Chiefs come out firing, they get a touchdown out of the gate, but I also think that the Chiefs offensive line has some issues, and I think that the Bengals defensive line can also exploit them. They can pressure Mahomes up the middle, they get him maybe rattled a little bit, and they might have some drives where they're able to stop them from crossing the 50 and forcing them to punt. But with this kind of offense, all it really takes is kind of one play to really break things open, and at that point, maybe it might just be too late. So the offense is definitely going to be tasked upon matching them drive for drive, because as good as the defense might be able to potentially limit them, I think there's definitely going to be some type of breaking point late in the game where the Chiefs just kind of break off some explosive plays, and it'll put a lot of stress back on the Bengals offense to match that.
So Marvin Lewis is I believe he's 6-2 against Kansas City in his tenure, and has arguably the biggest win of his entire Bengals career against Kansas City, which was back in 2003, that put the Bengals basically on the map. Put Chad Johnson on the map. Kansas City at the time, I believe, was 9-0. Cincinnati was 4-5, 5-4, and they stunned Kansas City at home thanks to Peter Warrick, if you remember that name, coming up with some huge plays. Chad Johnson coming up with a couple of plays. John Kitna was quarterback. Carson Palmer was riding the bench. So Cincinnati has beaten Kansas City in important contests before. It's been on both fields. This is probably the most talented Kansas City team. I mean, you can go back to that 2003 team that was 9-0. I would venture to say that this is a better Kansas City team, but this may be a better Cincinnati team than we've seen in years past, based on their resiliency, their ability to come back. Andy Dalton's playing at a high level. The defense is feast or famine, but when it's feast, right?
Yeah.
So how confident are you in this year's team, even if they get down, like you said, maybe Mahomes gets an early lead, all that kind of stuff. How confident are you, based on what's transpired, in those first 5 weeks, what transpired last week, how confident are you with the Bengals to not only make this a close game, but potentially sneak out of there with a win, even with the injuries and all the issues?
It's the funniest thing because I go into this game, excited to watch a young Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City offense, do their thing, even if it's against the team that I root for. And I'm excited to do that because I don't expect the Bengals to win because it's on a Sunday night game and potentially the quarterback will be better than the quarterback for the Bengals. But for the first time, going into these kind of games, I do kind of have confidence that they have a chance because of Andy Dalton. That's something that I'm not used to saying after watching him for 7 years, but he's starting to play at a more consistent and level and stable, level of play. And that's just not something that we could say for, the majority of the time that he's been here. He's been kind of like that roller coaster. He has ups and he has downs. This year it's just kind of been a steady positive regression. And that's obviously good to see. And then going up against the defense that is arguably or is statistically worse than the Bengals in terms of pass defense, that gives them a chance. That gives them a chance to at least compete and stay within range of Kansas City's offense. And again, I don't have confidence that they can win games like this until they do, which is why I go into this game expecting a loss. But with the way that Dalton and the offense is playing around him, that there's still a bit of a light a light in the darkness, if you will. And that's something that you're not used to saying when in regards to Andy Dalton, who's always been inconsistent. For once he's starting to be consistent and and people can rely on him to put up whatever kind of production is needed for them to win the game.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think he's got 7 interceptions on the year. Dalton does. I'll need to double check that, but I would venture to guess that at least 3 of those were not on him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's been very good.
Yeah.
Going on that point, you probably have John Ross back. He went full go at practice on Wednesday. You don't know about Billy Price. Probably not him. Probably not Gio Bernard. Definitely not Eifert. Definitely not Croft. You go up against the worst passing defense in the Chiefs in the NFL this year. They do have Eric Berry, who's still a high quality player. Is the game plan, you think, and not just, hey, let's get into the Bengals mindset, but what's, from an outsider perspective, what's the better path to victory? Do you play to that weakness and you wing the ball around, you get Tyler Boyd involved, potentially John Ross, AJ Green, do you go that route? Or, like I said earlier, you're a new school guy, I mean that in a positive way, but and today's NFL, that's what it is. It's pass. I mean, 3rd and 2s are not a run. It's not a run play. It's a pass play for most teams, right? So, or is the play, what? We have to give Joe Mixon 35 to 40 touches this game. And if he's effective, he can grind the clock. I don't know where to balance that, because I mean you can go exactly to a team's weakness and say, well, yeah, we're going to pass. But Mixon has shown the ability, especially late in games, to really carry the Bengals, pun intended, to wins and to big plays. You know what I mean?
No, yeah, like the one of the reasons why they lost or why they weren't as successful on offense still is because they shied away from Mixon. I don't mind if Mixon gets 20, 25 touches or carries in this game. I just want the vast majority of those to come out of the shotgun because that's what works. I want them to do what works for them. I want them to just put their players in the best positions for them to succeed. If that's running Mixon out of the shotgun or out of the pistol, which he did all in his career at Oklahoma, then do that. Like, don't try to pigeonhole a player into doing something that they can't produce in. If they don't have an offensive line that can run inside zone with Dalton under center, then they can't do that. Even against a lowly defense in Kansas City, if it doesn't work, don't keep trying to do it. Do what works with your personnel. And I would perfectly be okay with Mixon getting 20, 25 carries under those circumstances because odds are, based off the data from the first 6 weeks, they're going to be successful doing it. Have Boyd and Uzoma as those safety blankets underneath and give Green positive matchups against a weak secondary. You know, they have the weapons to do this. They have the personnel to put up points against Kansas City, even in an atmosphere that historically they've done bad in. But just put your players in the best position to succeed. Whatever route, new school, old school that takes, then so be it.
I love that, because you have kind of, I guess, sort of contradicted a comment by one of our good friends, Michael Myers, in the YouTube chat, because I have always been a proponent, like you said, put your guys in the best situations to potentially succeed, the best game plans to potentially succeed, right? Mm-hmm. So I've been a big proponent. Hey, you know, John Ross, if you're not confident in him on offense, why not try him on kick returns or punt returns? He was electric at those in college, right? Mm-hmm. There are other guys like that on the Bengals, and we want to save him. We don't want him to get hurt. So with Giovanni Bernard out, Mark Walton being relatively ineffective at times, the Bengals cutting ties with Thomas Rawls in a really weird signing that happened there. Michael Myers says you can't run Mixon more than 20 to 25 carries. If he goes down, all we have left is Walton. They rode him against the Ravens to a win. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Bengals got up because of the pass early, but they rode him to a win later. He gutted out a performance, had a knee procedure done from there. Is there validity? I mean, more often than not, I would say, Michael, disagree, because you got to give your best players the football, but the Bengals are really thin at that position. Does he have a point, or is it just like, hey, still got to give him the ball? That's what you pay him for. That's what you drafted him in the second round for.
Yeah, if it works, it works. Like, again, if they use him smartly, and that's, you know, not running him under the I formation, you know, 13, 15 times a game, then yeah, by all means, like, you can't just like go into a week with saying, hey, we're going to give Mixon 25 carries because someone said that we're like 20-1 when our running back carries the ball 25 times. They carry 25 times and get 70 yards. What's the point?
Right. You do what works. Yeah.
And whatever the course of the game kind of takes you.
Right.
If you find soft spots in the Chiefs secondary, expose them. You know, get some short passes out there, and then, you know, based off that, try to get one deep with Green. And if you're having success, you know, stretching the Chiefs defense laterally on some outside zone runs, then hit back with a bootleg and get you zone out on some yards after catch. You know, just kind of work off what works and just keep going from there. And whatever, again, like I think I've said this like 3 times, whatever kind of happens, what works during the game, just keep doing that and just kind of build off of it. And if something doesn't work, just don't be stubborn just because you think it will.
Right. And I see Michael's point because of the decimation at certain positions, but you draft guys for a reason. You fall in love with guys in the draft process for a reason. You draft them high for a reason. You pay them a lot of money for a reason. And a lot of times at the skill positions, it's to get the ball in their hands. So you can't go into a game and be like, well, we should really – I mean, sometimes you got to do that, especially, you know, if someone's coming back from a major injury or something like that. You got, you know, limit. It's kind of like a pitch count, right? But – it's a game you need to win. Football is different from baseball. I mean, to me, you got to give the guy touches, especially if it's working. Let's get out of here with your prediction here, John. We've gone a little long, and I'm worried that the Cincinnati Library is going to kick you out there, buddy. What's your prediction in this game? I teeter back and forth, to be honest with you, about what I feel on this one. I'm going to put you on the spot first.
31-20, yeah, 31-20 Chiefs. Like until they can win in this kind of situation, I just don't expect them to. I expect, you know, for the most part, a decently close game, but I just think that as the game goes on, the Chiefs will kind of find a way to break through that Bengals defense in one way or another, get some explosive plays, and that might ultimately be the difference. Like, most of the time, the better quarterback wins, and there's only 1 or 2 quarterbacks that are playing at a higher level than Patrick Mahomes is, and in a impossible, you know, venue to win at on Sunday night where they just don't have success. I just can't say with any confidence that they're going to win. So they very well could because of a couple of things with the Chiefs' pass defense and the way Dalton's playing, but until it happens, I just can't expect it. So 31-20 Chiefs.
I'm going to say this, like you said. Is this a game the Bengals could win? Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think they can win. I think that this Kansas City team is very beatable. They're very, very, very good, but they're very beatable. I think a lot of factors are going against Cincinnati this week. And I do think that if the Bengals end up pulling this one out, that's a pretty big season shifter.
Yeah.
If they can win this game, both for primetime TV purposes, beating a very good team on their turf, rebounding from the Steelers. I mean, if they could do all of that, that's impressive. I'm going to say this. I don't think they win. I think they very well can. I think it's probably going to be like a 26-23 or 30-27, something like that. I think it's going to be a fun game. I think it's going to be entertaining. The Bengals have shown that they will be in almost every single game late. And I think that's going to be what happens here, whether that means we're going to experience similar heartbreak to what transpired last week, or just the Bengals, not being able to close out or what have you. I think it's going to be very close. I think it's a tough venue. I will say this, Andy Reid has a lot of Marvin Lewis DNA in him as a head coach. He is a guy who does not always win the big games. He is a guy that has not necessarily done well in the playoffs. He's done better than Marvin Lewis in the playoffs, but there is a lot of Marvin Lewis-ish stuff going on there. Or I guess you could say there's a lot of Andy Reid-ish stuff going on there. If Andy Reid's been around for a while. So, I would not be surprised if the Bengals pulled this one out. But based on last week, based on the injuries, based on primetime, I hate to say it, and the team they're playing, I don't know if I see it, but that's kind of how I see things going. I see Michael Myers 21-28 Chiefs. I saw some other people that are saying Bengals. So that's kind of interesting. Who knows? They could rebound. We'll see. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Appreciate you tuning in, even after a Bengals loss and a heartbreaking one against the Steelers. You can get this program on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play. You can also get it on cincyjungle.com, Art19, and YouTube. We're on all of those channels. You can get in touch with us and follow us. So you can subscribe to us on those various channels, as well as on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Please do so. John Sheeran is at John_Sheeran on Twitter. Do follow him. He's a good follow. Even though I like to give him some help, he's a good follow. John, any final thoughts before we get out of here? I appreciate you making the effort to book a room at the UC library to join us.
Yeah, I guess you kind of brought up a point just real quick that I didn't. If this is a playoff game, Andy Reid versus Marvin Lewis, that's just a coin flip. So I don't trust either of those coaches to in a playoff scenario. So that's also another factor that kind of opens the door a little bit. But still, it's one of their biggest prove-it games of the year, and I said that last week, and I think it'll just tell us a lot about what this team really is.
Quickly, if the Bengals if the Bengals play a competitive game, it's pretty close. They end up losing and they going to 4-3. How do you feel about them going forward?
I feel that they can still make the playoffs, but I would still have the same minimal confidence that they can do anything once they're there.
Yep, that's and it stinks that that's where we're at. But usually a team that has two poor seasons in a row, they rebound nicely and start off pretty well. Usually you're like, hey, we can make the playoffs and maybe make a little run, but we've seen this song and dance before. We really have. Even though the Bengals have a couple more quality wins under their belt and have done some different things than in years past, we've just seen this song and dance before. And unfortunately, fans are kind of still, even though they're satisfied with a 4-2 record through the first basically third of the season, it's kind of show me more mode. And the Bengals do have to show more. They need to start beating some of these quality teams in big stages, and none more so than this Sunday. This is one of the bigger games in a really long time for the Bengals, and hopefully we can talk about a win next week. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Gazenza. Get this program how you can. Thanks for all of your support. Get all of the opinions, news, analysis, updates, and everything at cincyjungle.com. And we'll see you next week. And hopefully we're talking about a win. Who day, folks?